Here we have a tiny device meant for Linux emulation that mimics the styling of a Game Boy Color. Feels like a cinder block in your hands. This is the TrimUI brick, and yes, it does live up to its name. And remember, at the end of December, we're going to be giving away a TrimUI brick sponsored by litnxt.com. So if you'd like to win, subscribe to my channel and their channel, which is down below. That's all you have to do. Now let's look at this building block of gaming. This is a new Linux-based emulator that is in the vertical format in a relatively crowded market, and the TrimUI company has put out their brick, which is their entry into the lower end of this market. It's got a lot of things going for it, and the hardware and software package that they've put together for this one is pretty compelling, and does have some stiff competition though. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the hardware, the software, see what we can compare this to, and then make a decision and see if you actually think it's worth your dollar. And even though that dollar doesn't go that far today, this TrimUI brick feels very premium. We have a 3.2-inch 1024 by 768 IPS screen, 1 GB of RAM, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and a 3000 mAh battery. The screen is glossy and just fits oh so nicely into how they've done the housing here. On the front of the device, we have some branding from TrimUI, in addition to a D-pad that is squishy and not clicky, with a TrimUI logo in the center. They are pretty big on branding with this one. 2 custom function buttons that light up on the front here that are clicky and not squishy, ABXY buttons that are clicky and not squishy. And at the bottom of the front here, we have a menu button with the TrimUI logo again, and start and select buttons with play and stop on them for some reason, in addition to 2 speaker grills that are very loud and face forward, which is very nice to see. These things get very loud and sound great for how big this thing is. On the left hand side of the device, we have a volume up and down rocker that is clicky and not squishy. On the right hand side of the device, we have another logo, the TrimUI brick logo, a power button in teal that is clicky and not squishy, a toggle switch that is fantastic to see, and it clicks at each end very hard, kind of like a Game Boy on Switch. On the bottom of the device, we have an SD card which houses the operating system and ROMs, a reset button that is very tiny, a USB-C port for charging, a microphone hole, and a headphone jack. On the top of the device, we have nothing, but we do have a light bar, which is nice, and you can change the colors and change the different settings within the operating system. On the back at the top, we have a aluminum plate that has the TrimUI logo on the back, which makes this feel very nice. Moving down a little bit, we have the L1, L2, R2, and R1 buttons that are clicky and not squishy. In addition, they come with these tiny little keycaps that you can actually change out and swap for each different button depending on the feel that you like. I like this, and they also sent them in translucent and black, which is even better, because if you don't like the lights, you can just turn them off and it's no big deal. They also have housed just in the center between all those buttons another USB-C port, which is, I'm assuming, for data only and doing like firmware updates and stuff like that. As we move farther down the device, we have, you guessed it, more TrimUI logoing, in addition to some grippy texture on the back so you don't lose this thing. In addition to some hieroglyphics, this thing is a very tight package, and I really like some of the things that they've chosen. So this thing really does live up to its name. This thing is built like a tank. It is plastic, but they've done some interesting things to make it feel more premium. They put a metal backplate, which I'm assuming takes up some of the heat from the screen, but I'm not sure it could take anything from the CPU because it's behind the screen, and the other stuff would be down at the bottom. So I would assume that it's not taking up any CPU heat, but just any sort of residual heat that might get generated by the device. That does make a big difference, though, when you're looking at the entire build overall. That little metal backplate made a real difference in the feel of the device, because that's where your fingers are sitting on the back of the device. It makes it feel like it's a full aluminum body, but it really isn't. So they've gotten away with making it feel good with keeping the cost down. And the plastic that they used for the rest of the parts of the device, it really doesn't make a big difference. I mean, the aluminum's really, really thin, so I'm assuming it probably has around the same strength as a thick plastic would when you would drop it. So then where do I think this lands on the hardware scale? Well, I think they made a few distinct decisions on the hardware to make it stand out from the other offerings because of how cheap this thing is. and they made sure that they put lights on it, because the lights actually, for me, really do make a difference, because you're in the $40 category. They made it a little bit smaller, put this fancy metal plate on the back, and really tightened up the edges. So the top of the screen really feels tight when you look at the top, and just all the little gaps and bezels. It looks very nice, and for what you're getting this for, I think the lights, the addition of the shell, and the screen all make a nice hardware package. But that's not all we have to talk about. So let's look at the software next and see what the internals of this thing can produce. And this brick is running Linux. And on top of that, we have TrimUI's front end, which right when you log in, it dumps you into like a favorite screen. But if you just hit B a few times and back out of that, you can actually get into the regular TrimUI settings. And front end, that is just so much easier to choose from. You go into games, and then all of your systems are listed with little pictures. And just scrolling through here, there's a ton of different systems on here, but everything in the 8 and 16-bit eras of things, all the way up to the 32-bit eras and 3D graphics, we could play here. So that means your Game Gear, Game & Watch, Game Boy, and Game Boy Color all play very well on here. And there's a bunch of different scaling options for each console because we're using RetroArch here. That's in addition to the Game Boy Advance, which looks very nice on this console, and you can choose to scale it however you wish. Moving up the power band just a little bit, Pico 8 works very well on here, and the Neo Geo Pocket. The PlayStation and Super Famicom also work well on here and scale well to this screen size. But I would stick to games that you're going to be using just a D-pad for. Moving up the power band just a hair, we get to N64. And for the N64, this is kind of where the power band breaks down a little bit, because some games play pretty well, like Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart, but there were some issues with tearing on Donkey Kong and a few other games. In addition, we don't have a stick on this console, so I don't really recommend a ton of N64 games for this, but it will get the job done for a good amount of them. Moving up the power band even more, we get to the PSP. And for this system, I don't recommend the PSP. It will play games, but you're missing a stick, in addition to this aspect ratio not being conducive for PSP gameplay. So you can play a few simple, easy to run games on the PSP on this, like Loco Roco and stuff like that, but you're not going to get the full experience because you'll either be stretched or relegated to a very small screen versus what it was natively made for. Now this brings us to the Nintendo DS, which I think the power level for this system is great for. It plays tons of the DS games totally fine, in addition to being able to speed them up a bit, but it does come with a little bit of tinkering. Out of the box at this current firmware, it is using drastic and you need to adjust the screen. This shows up and it's showing both screens instead of just being able to flip between both and full screening the whole thing. But remember, you don't have a touch input for this device. So anything you're going to play with the screen, you'll either need a ROM hack for. Other than that, I think the stock firmware on this device as of now is very good for what we're getting. And TrimUI is nice because it just really does cut down on the OS a lot and doesn't do a whole ton of messing about. Now you can get into the weeds a little bit when you're setting your custom buttons and changing the backlight, but that's really the only tough part about this system. And I think they do a pretty decent job of putting it all in the settings and apps section of the device. So for me, the TrimUI software package is a little bit lacking. Now, not lacking as in it's not going to play as many games as I want it to, or the features are lacking. It's just very, very bare bones. The UI is kind of, here are the games, here are the folders, here you go. So to me, I think the software does totally fine. If you're interested in just making a list of your favorite games, going right into them and not messing with the settings that much, this is totally easy and it is in line with all the other cheap emulators out there. If you're looking to tweak and make multiple different iterations, you're going to maybe want to download a different software package for this, like MinUI or some other Linux-based software front end that will probably make this thing a little bit easier just to overall use day to day. But if you're sticking with the stock software, it turns on and goes to sleep very quickly with one button. The function buttons were actually easy enough to keybind and then use. I really like the switch. I love the switch. I don't know why they didn't use that just for the power switch on and off. I don't know why people don't do that, but the switch is fantastic. The problem is it's not bound to anything important. So it should be the on-off button or just like a toggle sleep on off. I don't know why it can't do that. That might come in a different firmware update, but I've said it before, the Logitech G Cloud had an on and off toggle button or toggle switch like that, and I absolutely loved it. I don't know why more consoles don't do that, but the physical on and you feel a click is fantastic. It's how a Game Boy feels, and that feel is awesome. So they got really close with this. They need to tweak a little bit of the software, or somebody in the community can, and then that will be a feature that I would really like. But overall, the software package, I think, is very adequate for the price point that you're getting this device for. That being said, there is a lot of stiff competition, and this little brick is going to have to handle it under all of that pressure, and you know, pressure makes diamonds, so we're going to see if my bad joke lands. Well, it doesn't, so let's look at the other devices that this thing's up against. And the TrimUI brick has got some stiff competition in this price category, like the Miu Mini V4, which is a little bit smaller, which you can get for around $76 with shipping. The Anbernic RG35XX Plus, which is around the same size but a hair bigger, at around the $86 price point. The TrimUI brick coming in at around $90. The Powkiddy V10, which I think is fantastic for Game Boy Advance games, at around $54. And if that's all you're playing, I highly recommend that one. And if you're looking for something that's got a little bit bigger of a screen and a joystick, the Anbernic RG40XXV is very nice as well, and that comes in at around $90. Now, I'm getting all of these prices from litnxt.com, who are the people who sent over this handheld for review, and I will have links to their website down below where you can pick any of these handhelds up, with varying different SD card packages. I think, as an overall package, this thing is competitive with the market that's currently out there, offering a few different things that are new and interesting compared to the devices that are out there already. Now, do I think this is the best one overall? No. Do I think there is other options for your money? Absolutely. I think there are many that I've already listed in this video. This, though, would be one of my top 5 for the year. It's coming out at the very end of the year, and I think this is one of the options that you should be considering if you're looking at the top 5 vertical, cheap handheld emulators for the year. So I would say if you like this size, between the Miu Mini but not as small as the Anbernics, take a look at this video next, because I've done full in-depth reviews of those and even compared a bunch of these handhelds before. So I would stick that in the lineup, probably around 3, and get rid of the Powkiddy big tall yellow one. That's what I would do if that would be my top 5. So take a look at these videos here, and I will catch you all later. Davey out.